right, in this video, I hope to go through the bulk of Renaissance theater, but really not including England and not including Commedia dell'arte. I've created separate videos for those two things. So here we go. So the Renaissance itself, the term Renaissance, it means rebirth. The Italy was the center of activity, and if you think of it like throwing a pebble into a pond, it ripples outward. So while Italy was kind of the center of the revolution, the Cultural Revolution, the same impact sort of happened in expanding circles, concentric circles, as time went by, but later. Um, so the Renaissance was marked by a new period of wealth. People have more disposable income, and so because of that, they had more time to engage in leisure activities. So that's why there's a lot of artistic renewal coming around that time. And another difference was that art now was dealing with human beings as a worthwhile subject on their own rather than just being a product of divine creation, which was really a benchmark of the medieval art medieval era art. So that, human beings are worthwhile to study and appreciate. And so throughout the Renaissance, all throughout Europe, it was a time of not only wealth, but invention and creativity and exploration. A lot of stuff is happening in the Renaissance. So here we go. I thought it would be interesting to look at just visually. I know this is a visual art thing, but I do think it's a good representation of what was happening in all of the Renaissance. So I wanted to look at a little difference of medieval art to Renaissance art. So here we have medieval art, which is really identified by this very two-dimensional, flat type of artistry. You can see that there's an attempt at, some shading around the eyes, but these people, this is more of like an illuminated text. These are artworks on their own, and they were, high quality artworks for the time, but they're very flat. They don't seem like there's real depth to these human beings. And another funny feature is that babies themselves were drawn in a way that made them look like just small adults, like miniature adults. As you can see here, this baby is not too bad. It does have baby-like features, but this one for sure is, I mean, he's got the receding hairline and everything. He's like a little miniature adult, but also the head to body proportion is pretty unusual for a baby. And so then we transition to Renaissance art, where we do see this study in depth. So perspective and depth was a important part of Renaissance art. So of course we have Mona Lisa here, which we've got the shading and the shadows. We feel like she is a three-dimensional person. We have also some Botticelli here. I think this is Raphael, if I remember, maybe Michelangelo, I can't remember. But we do have these, we've got people in the distance, people near to the vantage point. We've got perspective, we've got architecture, all sorts of things that we didn't have in the medieval era. Also, the subject matter is different. Yes, there is still certainly a lot of religious imagery, but the Renaissance was also a re-interest in the classical structure. So we've got, I think this is supposed to be Aristotle. We have some mythological events happening here. Bill Rusk, if you've had classes with me, if you've had classes with him, I apologize to him profusely for not knowing my art better than I do. But anyway, you see the big difference between medieval and Renaissance art. Just for fun, I'm going to link these down in the comments. There we go. Link them down in the comments. There are a few really funny blog pages that sort of poke fun or, find these wonderful treasures of medieval and Renaissance art. So I'll let you look at those if you're kind of bored. All right. So one of the big features of Renaissance theater is that we are rediscovering Aristotle's ideals of neoclassicism. So these are some things that we talked about in the ancient Greek unit. Maybe some things that we didn't lay on too much, but we'll touch on them here. So his treatise that we've talked a lot about this semester was rediscovered during the Renaissance era and then published in 1531. So that is an important detail. People are now having access, people who could read have access to the writings of Aristotle, whereas prior to this, in the medieval era, these things were not only, not being acknowledged or found, as the case may be, but they were all often, Greek antiquities were features or examples of pagan cultures. So the church often sought to suppress them and destroy them. So that's a part of the reason we don't have a whole lot of remaining texts and other evidence from that time period, was because they were intentionally destroyed. So again, the Renaissance has a different view on those things. So we've got Aristotle's work being rediscovered. In that time, and I believe we've mentioned it, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it again, the three unities were part of Aristotelian ideals, in which case the three unities, we have the unity of time, and that is that all the plot in the play should occur in ideally real time, but we can expand that to be up to 1 hour. So we can put in little gaps of time, but they cannot be very long. I'm sorry, up to 24 hours. We also have the unity of place, which is that the entire play takes place in one setting. Again, we can, fudge that a little bit so that it can be a place that you can reach within 24 hours. Most often it would be more like, if we do have any kind of scene change, which, may or may not be likely, we can move from, the front yard to the backyard, and that's about it. And then finally, a unity of action, which is that there's no mixing of genres. A tragedy is a tragedy, a comedy is a comedy. We don't integrate them. And then there are limited subplots. Now, again, these three unities are followed occasionally by artists in the Renaissance. When we talk about Shakespeare, this is not something that he abides by at all. But some artists do, and this was something that was novel to the many Renaissance artists. Also, the idea of verisimilitude comes out again. So this is the idea that drama should be true to life, that there should be some realism to it. Definitely not in the sense that it will be important in the 1800s, but at least we get the idea here. As we've mentioned in the Greek time period, on-stage violence was forbidden. It was not to be a part of what was happening on stage. Violence could happen and be implied off stage, but not on stage. The neoclassicists also opposed the soliloquy. By the way, the term neoclassicism, neo means new, classicism is referring to ancient Greece, the antiquities. So that's why we get that term. They were opposed to the soliloquy because that was not natural for somebody to come out on stage and talk to the audience. So that was also an important part. And my face is blocking it a little bit, but there are chorus and supernatural characters that may be a feature of Greek theater, but that was not included in this rediscovery in the Renaissance. So that's one way it shifted a little bit. And also the idea was declamatory acting. Now, acting style does not change for the most part until the 1800s. Acting was pretty big and bold. We want to make sure not only audiences are able to see us and see our expressions, but it was not intended to be realistic and subtle. So this declamatory acting, I think it's important to just point that out, that that's still a thing. And again, you're not being subtle and realistic in your emotion and your portrayal as an actor. Okay, so here we're going to hit the Italian, the Spanish, and the French Renaissance, and we're probably going to go through it hopefully rather quickly. So here are the three forms, oops, of Italian theater. I don't know how that one got left there. Just leave it there and we'll get to it. So we have intermezzi, which are little plays, little playlets, short things in between acts of full-length plays. So even our intermissions had entertainment in them. These intermezzi were mythological tales. They were very interested in spectacle and the visual impact of it. Next up, we have pastorals. So pastoral comedies are short, ribald or kind of saucy comedies. They're focused on romance. There's shepherds, there's mythological creatures. A lot of people hear that word pastoral and they think it has to do with church, and that's not at all the case. The root word is the same. Pastoral means pasture, or the having to do with shepherding and wilderness, and so that has obvious references in church settings. A pastor is like a shepherd, and then a pastoral comedy is focused on things of outside. I mean, it's springtime right now. What are the, little lambs are being born and things like that. So a lot of cycle of nature, rebirth, that sort of thing. And then finally, the big contribution in Italian theater forms that, impacts us still today is opera. Intermezzi and pastoral comedies really are not a thing. There's not any good, evidence, not any good plays that we still put forth from this time period, but certainly operas still have their impact. They were created because people thought they were recreating the Greek structure, that same Greek tragic style with singing in it. Remember, the chorus was an influential part, and these musicals, these tragedies, they were sung and performed. So that idea of an opera was an attempt to recreate that tragic style. As you may or may not know, opera is drama. Sometimes it's comedy, but at least at the beginning, it was tragedy set entirely to music. Every part is sung. They did begin in Florence around 1600, but we do have, the precursors to it prior to that. Sometimes we consider it a part of music rather than theater. It was funny, having studied both music and theater in college settings and higher education settings. Opera was kind of the redheaded stepchild. All of my music classes, they really kind of said, that's more of a theater form. We're not going to look at it. And all of my theater classes said, that's more of a music form. We're not going to look at it. So, so it's kind of one of these things that doesn't really have a home. Here we go. So here are some locations and structures that will help you get the idea of the visual impact of theater in the Renaissance. That is the biggest, aside from opera, that is the biggest contribution that Italy gave. So here we have the Teatro Olimpico in Venice. We have these very stone, very ornate stone structures. In the middle of each of these windows, these are not actually deep stages. Those are just two-dimensional paintings. They are painted using vanishing points. If you've studied any bit of art, you would understand, a vanishing point right smack dab in the middle of this PowerPoint slide, that archway. I don't think you can see my, let me give you my little, right here. that is the vanishing point for this image. Everything seems to be going back to this point. But this entire window, and I'm going to, mess this up with my marker here. This entire window, everything in there, that is just a painting. That is not an actual street, as realistic as that seems. So that gives you a sense of how visually impactful these places were meant to be. Um, so also, oops, let me clear off this marker now. So also, I hope you'll remember this Roman theater. This was back from our ancient Greek unit, ancient theater unit, and you have this Roman theater that looks very, very much like what we just looked at. So there it is again. Again, this is the Renaissance one, but it's that same structure. And here's an even more, yes, this is a great picture of it. So again, we can see this very Roman shape to the theater structure. It's a little bit smaller scale, but very much Roman. Cool. All right, the next one is the Teatro Farnese in Parma. This is one view. This is looking out at the audience. This is where we get the idea of the pit, the gallery, and the boxes. So these are common locations in audience seating. So the pit would be the orchestra seating. The galleries would be the mezzanine or balcony seating. And then the boxes would be the special seating areas to the side. These are still terms used today in theater. And you'll see better pictures of these. I have another image to show you in just a moment. But this is again replicating that sort of semicircular structure of the classic era. Here we go. Oh, I'm gonna, in post-production, ooh, I'm using fancy terms. I'm gonna move my image out of the way. For right now, it's in the way. So this is the same location, but we're just looking at it from the audience to the stage now. The first one I showed you was from the stage to the audience. Now we just have it turned around. So again, we have this proscenium arch. We have the open flooring, that's the pit, or it used to be the orchestra area, and then the teatro area, which was the seating space, the audience sitting space. So that's another structure from Italy. And then we can talk about the perspective scenery. I've already kind of mentioned it in the Teatro Olimpica, in those little windows, the painting, but we also have that pole and chariot system, or the wing and drop system, that we've talked about way back in our design unit. So this was making use of perspective painting. We have that rake stage. So the rake stage, remember, means the rake means it's on an angle. So that upstage is literally going up the angle towards the back wall of the stage, and downstage is literally going down the ramp to the audience. So that's where we get that term. And the reason that was employed was because not only are the wing and drops drawing, a sense of distance as they go further back, but the stage being raked upward is also creating that sense of distance, so that backdrop seems really, really far away. Just another picture of the same thing. I don't know why I did that. Oh, here we go. So this is, again, this is like a bird's eye view, that wing and drop system. We can slide each one of these flats out. Let me get a color here. So we can slide each one of these flats out of its location and then slide it back. So we have several others here waiting to be slid out, but the red one right now is slid out. So we can change it up if we like. Oh, and this is the pole and chariot system, where those flats, instead of just being in a groove on the floor, they actually extend all the way into the basement, and we have mechanisms for moving them in and out. We've talked about this all before in class. I know it seems like a century ago. All right, next up is the Spanish Renaissance. So the Spanish Renaissance, there actually is a whole huge repertoire of theater and plays produced from this time period. Of course, they're in Spanish, but it's a huge repertoire. So we have both religious dramas, which the Auto Sacramentalis are religious dramas, but then we also have the secular dramas, which are more focused on commedia styles. The Auto Sacramentalis, the religious ones, were more serious. So Spanish acting companies, we're actually going to be seeing a lot of similarities between Spanish acting companies and English acting companies in the Renaissance. We had 16 to 20 performers in an acting company. They did include women, which was surprising. This is not a common feature of Renaissance theater, with the exception of commedia. They were unsupported by the church. This is important because the reason women were not included in theater in some respects had to do with religious arguments, which I think I'll get into maybe when I get into the English Renaissance part. They also had these structures of sharing companies, meaning you as an actor or a member of the company would pay in to the company. So you're paying in and investing to produce plays, and then when those plays succeed and the company succeeds, you take a profit. So much like, you know, having stocks in a company today is like, that is the way Spanish acting companies worked. De la Barca and Vega are two of the big names in Spanish playwrights. They are both responsible for a great deal of plays, putting Shakespeare to shame, actually. Shakespeare in his 39 or whatever plays you want to call it. So we're talking hundreds of plays. So I'm not going to, again, get into these details. So this is what a lot of Spanish theaters looked like. They were performed in chorales. And these chorales, we're actually going to see a very similar structure in England and our English Renaissance. So they were constructed in existing courtyards between buildings, and I'll explain that a little bit more in our English unit. But they were open air, so it's during the day, daylight's lighting the stage, and the boxes, which are these areas on the side, and the actors on stage are being protected by a roof. Here is an actual image, which some of these plays are still performed this way. So you can get that idea of the structure. This, again, looks very much like the traditions in England. And then finally, we move into the French Renaissance. So the French Renaissance, the Renaissance didn't really flourish in France until a bit later because of some upheaval and civil war and religious political issues happening in that time. So we're really talking about the 1600s. So the big name, I mean, I've got several names, but the big one to take note of in French Renaissance style is Molière. He was born Jean-Baptiste Poquelin. I hope I did that right. He was originally an actor and then became a playwright. His plays were highly political. Frequently they attacked the church. So we have two issues that although the politics, you know, he was supported by the politicians in some cases in making these very political plays, but then he was attacked by the church. He was actually called a demon in the flesh by a particular vicar in France. So, you know, he was very much not shying away from the political and religious upheaval that's happening in that time period. So some of his comedies are listed here. Tartuffe and Misanthrope are probably his two most famous that are still done today and still enjoy a lot of favor. I forget where I was going with this. His plays are very much based on commedia, which I don't know if you're watching this in order. Probably you have not watched the commedia video yet. So make sure you do. And then, so a lot of what he did was take the commedia characters and simple plots, and then he solidified them as written plays. So this is a lot of how we understand what commedia looked like, because of the formalized version of commedia that he's writing. A French location, a French theater, was I'm gonna butcher this, Hôtel de Bourgogne. Um, so this is a little image of what that would have looked like. Again, I hope you're seeing very similar structures from one um, country to the next. This is the same theater, but again, just a cross section, so you can see we do have standing room here. We have seating over the side. We have this kind of balcony seating in the back, and our stage up here is going very proscenium. The Comédie Française is again another theater. Now we have, look at all of the different stacks of audience members that we have and boxes that we've got. We've got what, 4 levels going upward. So we have a very tall stage. Again, this is moving forward into the 1700s, this playhouse. And then we also have converted tennis courts being a popular um, theatrical venue of this time period, where tennis was a very popular sport in France for centuries before this. Tennis. It was all about tennis. I know we think about tennis as a modern thing. It is very, very old sport. So they have these indoor tennis courts, which they do convert to theaters, and they have, it makes sense. They're big open spaces, and we get that nice conversion. So you can see this sort of diagram, a cross section of a theater, so you can see how that is done.